Hi, I'm Bryce Crittenden.
Hi, I'm Caroline Land, and welcome back to EPL's Overdue Finds.
Caroline, how are you today?
I'm good, Bryce. How are you?
Excellent. I'm pretty excited about today's episode.
I am too. We were getting ready to start recording, and we almost gave too much away in our conversation with each other and with our guest today because we just couldn't wait to talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. It was one of those things where we're chatting and we're like, okay, we must save this for the podcast. And today's talk is going to be really fun. It's going to be interesting. I'm curious to see where it kind of takes us. But today we are talking about unsolved mysteries, and not just any unsolved mysteries. We're chatting about like the old school Robert Stack hosted Unsolved Mysteries, along with the new Netflix series, of course. But today we're going to be chatting about both series. We're probably going to be chatting a little bit more about the old Robert Stack series because we just discovered that you can stream like all 12 seasons of it now through Hoopla. So when we saw that, I was like, Caroline, we have to talk about Unsolved Mysteries.
Absolutely. And I know that we've talked about true crime on here on the podcast in the past. And this is such a nice pairing with that because Unsolved Mysteries was weekly true crime as well as the mysteries of the universe.
Yeah, absolutely. It scared me as a child, and we're going to chat a little bit more about that later. But joining us today to chat all about Unsolved Mysteries is Overdue Finds family member Meg DeForest. Meg, how are you? Welcome back to the show.
I am doing great. I am so excited to be on this episode. And yeah, I think that I might beat out those friends of the podcast. You got to be family if you do the editing. So, I like to be there, just a little competitive. So
yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
you've been doing awesome work for us behind the scenes of doing a lot of the editing here, especially over the last few months. And when we had a meeting the other day chatting about, what should we talk about on the podcast? And you were very enthusiastic when this topic got brought up. So I was like, Meg, you have to come on and chat with us about this.
Mm-hmm. It's going to be great.
All right. So before we get started today, I just want to give a quick shout out to a listener. I'm not sure if she wants me to share her last name, but I'll just say listener Kelly. She sent us an email the other day, and we always love hearing from listeners, don't we, Caroline?
It's like the best thing ever.
It is. Yeah. I opened up my inbox and there was a message there. It said, hi. So I start reading it and I'm just like, oh, this is awesome. So I just want to quickly share it with listeners because we love getting this feedback. So Kelly wrote us and she said, I've been listening to the podcast since the beginning and love it. Thanks for always providing enjoyable episodes. I often have moments during a listen of OF. So she has in brackets Overdue Finds, where I'm like, Peter Dinklage in Elf and just awkwardly shout, yes. But I never write in and comment, and I thought I finally should. In the episode released this morning, so she's talking about the YRCA episode, I was so happy to hear Bryce mention The Wizard. I legit have it on DVD, and my husband and I quote it often. And frankly, the release of Mario Brothers 3 in the film was brilliant. Not to mention the Power Glove. I mean, come on, so awesome. She continues to say, I also had to share a comment on your Back to the Future episode. So you had talked about memorable appearances in the film, but no one mentioned Elijah Wood's cameo. So that was in part 2, I believe. Even after the Lord of the Rings shout out, which we had earlier. And she goes on to say, thanks as well for the Get Thee Back to the Future recommendation. I borrowed it on audiobook right away after that episode, and it was fantastic. I burst out laughing so many times. Anyhow, thank you again for the enjoyable series. I look forward to every new episode. So, Kelly, thank you so much for writing us. We love getting that feedback, and we also enjoy, too, like hearing that, people are enjoying the show. And, that means a lot to all of us on here because we all work behind the scenes on the podcast, and yeah, it's fun to do, and we're really glad. We're so appreciative that people are enjoying it. Meg, you had to love the shout out there because I believe the Get the Back to the Future was your recommendation, wasn't it?
Definitely, yeah. It's always nice when somebody actually checks something out that you recommend. That's like the secret librarian heart always loves it when somebody actually enjoys a recommendation. So yeah, it's always nice to hear.
There's a really nice feeling of satisfaction when you put something out on a display that you love and you just kind of leave it there and then you walk by later and see that it's gone. I always feel really good when that happens.
Well, as the only non-librarian on here, so I obviously don't get to experience that. So when I hear listeners like the picks that I share, because I know I definitely have some off-the-wall ones, yeah, I always love it. That's my equivalent of putting up a display in the branch and having somebody borrow my favorite items, I guess. One thing too, when I wrote Kelly back, I mentioned to her that the one thing I also forgot to mention in that episode with the wizard is a young Tobey Maguire makes a cameo appearance towards the end of the movie. He doesn't have a line, but he shows up kind of with the bad guy and with the other teens and tries to look menacing. But that if you get a chance, check out The Wizard and watch at the end for a young Tobey Maguire cameo there.
We could definitely start a cameo corner. Just start mentioning people who cameo in things on Overdue Finds.
We should.
I love that.
I like that.
I love that. And there's going to be a tie later on when we talk about Unsolved Mysteries.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, absolutely. So let's quickly move into, before we chat about Unsolved Mysteries, let's chat about our recent Overdue Finds picks. Meg, what have you been enjoying lately?
So I've just finished a novella called The Deep by Rivers Solomon. And it's another, I know, shocker to the listeners, a science fiction fantasy novella. It's my jam. But the story of this one is basically, what if when pregnant slaves were sort of thrown overboard on the ships coming to America, they didn't die and the children that they gave birth to become mermaids, basically. And so it's the story of this mermaid society that's built of these children of African sort of not, slaves. And so it's a really interesting concept. And it's kind of one of those things that I think maybe in years past, before we had this sort of explosion of novellas letting people write these kind of stories, I don't know that it would have been published or maybe would have gotten the kind of reception that it has. But I think it's a really great story and just really interesting. I definitely recommend checking it out. And because it's a novella, it's not a huge commitment. So you don't sort of have to, it's like less than 300 pages. You don't have to worry that it's going to take you ages to get through.
As a slow reader, I love hearing about those novellas and those short books. The beginning, what you were talking about, it sounds very dark, actually. Is the rest of the book kind of along that theme too?
It's actually a really positive book, I would say, because it's much more about their society and kind of what they've built. And so, yeah, I mean, it comes from a very dark, and there's definitely a lot of anger about what has happened. But I would say that the story itself is very positive and about sort of the society that they've built and how they kind of remember their history. And so I think that there's a lot of that, because I sort of read the afterword talking about how do we think about historical trauma and how do we think about our history and how do we keep history alive without just being trauma, right? Like, how do we think about things in a positive way? So I think that there's a lot about that that's very topical and interesting, but is kind of done because it's in this science fiction fantastical kind of setting, is a little bit removed. And so it can be really interesting and not maybe completely dark.
Caroline, how about you? What have you been enjoying lately?
This is another movie that I wanted to share. I said recently that I've watched a lot of movies this summer, and one of them that I really enjoyed was called Miss Juneteenth. This is a new release that came out earlier this summer, and it's available to stream through Canopy, which is one of EPL's online resources. And it's directed by Channing Godfrey Peoples, and it stars Nicole Beharie as a former beauty queen, the Miss Juneteenth of the title, who didn't quite live up to the expectations that people had for her based on her early success. And so she's living in her small town and now has a daughter who's old enough to be in the Miss Juneteenth pageant. And the daughter's not really that excited about it. And the mom tries to school her in the ways of the pageant and why it's important and what Juneteenth means for them. And that's all I'm going to say about the plot of it, because it's really just a really good family-based drama about the relationship between this mother and daughter. Great acting, strong story, really enjoyed it. Check out Miss Juneteenth on Canopy.
So I have to admit something. I don't think I'd heard about Juneteenth until like earlier this year, I want to say. And that was from watching the new Watchmen series on HBO, which, by the way, if you haven't watched it yet, I've talked about it briefly on the show before, but with everything that's been going on in the world, Watchmen is a must watch, and it really does explore those themes quite a bit. So I've heard of the movie title, and it sounds really interesting. So is it more of like a dramedy then?
Yeah, I think the tension between the mother and the daughter it can be amusing, but it's based in like drama of the frustrations they've experienced. The daughter just wants to kind of be her own person. The mom wants her to be more like her, and it's a way for them to kind of connect with each other and to see what is really important about their relationship that they want to preserve as they go through this. The pageant also involves things like a college scholarship, and there are other things around wanting more for your children than you've accomplished that the daughter may or may not fully appreciate. So I would say it's more on the drama side of things.
You touched on it too, just with Canopy. So many great movies that, like smaller independent films like Miss Juneteenth, that a lot of people may not have heard of. And go on there, and it's super easy to stream off of it, and you watch it pretty much on any device, and lots of great documentaries as well. So
absolutely, I spent a lot of time on Canopy this summer when movie theaters were closed, catching up on titles that I had missed. So
yeah.
Yeah. So what have you been enjoying, Bryce?
Well, I was trying to think of something a little bit different for my recommendation on today's episode. It's funny because the latest book I read is a true crime one, but I'm going to save that for another episode because we're going to be talking about that a lot today. Working from home here over the last like 4 or 5 months, I do find myself, I'm definitely listening to a lot more music than I was in the past. And I love going on our digital streaming service, Hoopla. We've got lots of great albums on there. The one band that I want to recommend, and it's funny because they've been around for probably about 50 years, I believe. But I think if they came out today, they would be super popular. And that's the classic rock group Heart. So, Caroline, your eyes lit up as soon as I mentioned Heart. Mm-hmm. Basically, they have an album on there called Live at the Royal Albert Hall. And it's funny, they're also joined on stage by the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. And it's funny because I'm not the biggest fan of live albums, but their sound on this album is amazing. They kind of play all of the greatest hits, if you will, and some new stuff as well. And their new stuff is actually pretty good on there. So a lot of people, most people, I'm willing to bet that are listening to this probably remember the most probably from their 80s power ballad days where they released like What About Love and These Dreams. I personally prefer their more classic rock stuff from the 70s. So songs like Barracuda, Magic Man, Dreamboat Annie, and Kick It Out. But yeah, if you're not familiar with Heart, Heart is led by sisters Ann and Nancy Wilson. Ann is on lead vocals. They both play guitar, and they kick ass. So I really think if they came out today, they would be super popular. And yeah, if you're one of our younger listeners, go check out some Heart. They're great.
Yeah, I want to give a shout out Crazy on You, which I think is my favorite Heart song.
Mine too. I love that one. Probably because it's on the Knight's Tale soundtrack, which is just dates me in a probably very concerning way. But
yeah, I think my favorite is probably Barracuda. It's one of those songs where it's like if I hear it, I have to turn it up and just listen to the whole thing. So yeah, I want to give a shout out to the music of Heart. Definitely go check it out. All right. So let's chat about Unsolved Mysteries. We're all excited to be talking about it. Hopefully, those of you who are listening today are also just as excited as we are. We think you are, obviously, if you're listening to this episode.
And if you saw what with us in general, you're probably okay talking about Unsolved Mysteries.
Absolutely. So as I mentioned at the top of the show, we're chatting about, of course, the old version with Robert Stack and also the new Netflix series as well. They have 6 new episodes that just recently came out. But before we start talking about Unsolved Mysteries, I just wanted to quickly share some interesting facts about the show. So not counting the new Netflix series, there are approximately 617 episodes of the original series. And of course, the original was hosted by Robert Stack and ran from 1987 through 2002. Some of you might remember actor Dennis Farina hosted a revival of the show, which was syndicated and ran from 2008 until 2010. This part I loved hearing about. More than 260 mysteries were solved over the course of the series, and I thought this was really interesting. I'm curious to see if any of you were able to check it out. Matthew McConaughey's first acting job was in a reenactment in season 5, episode 12. Yeah. So, yeah, I know I'm a little bit older than both of you, but do you remember this show from when you were growing up? And like, if so, like, did you watch it? Were you scared of it like I was?
Oh, definitely. The theme music, I think, is like always really scary to children, or at least there's that like visceral memory of it coming on like after children's television and just kind of being a bit freaky. So I definitely remember watching it.
Absolutely. I remember watching it. I remember kind of having this sense of, especially with like the missing person or the at-large episodes, like the bank robber, or the murderer, or whoever it was, just being totally convinced that they were going to show up like outside my window or something like that. Even though, I mean, a small town in Northern Ontario was probably not like the first place these potential criminals were headed, but you never know. And that was one of, I think, the things about Unsolved Mysteries was it had this kind of way of sucking you into it. Like it had not only the stories, but it encouraged people to call in to share information. This idea that maybe you can help solve a mystery really kind of made it an active show, even though I never helped solve a mystery.
I really wanted to help solve a mystery, but to be honest, the theme music always scared me as a kid. Not only the theme music, but just the tone of the show as well. I mean, you have Robert Stack, who, it's funny because like as a kid, I knew him just from Unsolved Mysteries. But as I got older, I watched movie like Airplane where he's in that. And then I was like, oh, this guy's like a serious actor. I just didn't know at the time. So I was kind of surprised to see him in Airplane when I got a little bit older. But yeah, same with me. It's funny, Caroline, you mentioned that they, of course, would talk about either these murders or robbers or whatever, and they're on the run. The thing that always frightened me the most was they always seemed to be on the run to Canada. And why that scared me, obviously, is we live in Canada, but growing up in Medicine Hat, we're like a little over an hour away from the American border. So I just assumed that they were heading towards I think it's the Coots or Wild Rose border crossing in southern Alberta. And I just was just figured they were heading to Medicine Hat, and I was going to be in trouble basically. So
I wish I could have taken away some of your anxiety, because I was thinking the same thing. Manitoulin Island, where I grew up, is very close to Michigan, and honestly, if they could get to the Upper Peninsula and then hop on a boat, they're on the island. So, like, this was really possible if they escaped through the Upper Peninsula of Michigan.
Sounds like it would have been a great place to try and escape into Canada.
I was much more worried about amnesia. I don't know what that says about me, but like all of the like brain aneurysms and amnesia, I like the quicksand that appeared in all 80s movies really loomed larger in my imagination than probably it was a concern for real life.
Yeah, definitely quicksand. I really thought that was something that as an adult I would just have to learn to get around. But yeah, I haven't come across any quicksand yet. So maybe there is an episode of Unsolved Mysteries on quicksand. We don't know. But so it's funny because we've explored this theme in a couple of our past episodes. We did one on true crime where we chatted with Jana Pruden from the Globe and Mail. And of course, probably one of our most downloaded episodes was when we chatted with Mindhunter author John Douglas. But this comes up, and I'm always curious to get everybody's thoughts here, Meg especially. What is it kind of about these dark tales that are presented on Unsolved Mysteries that you think kind of keep drawing us back to them?
Yeah, I think there's a combination of like that campfire story, like that wanting to be scared and have that story that, it didn't happen to you, so you can sort of go back feeling better about it, but also kind of, okay, well, that's the worst that can happen. I don't have to worry about the worst thing. That's the worst thing. And so, yeah, I definitely think there's something about that's sort of intrinsic to humans, where we just want to hear these terrible stories, and then we can sort of feel better that, okay, well, my life is okay. Like I haven't had that happen to me, so I'll be all right.
Caroline, how about you?
I think that another one of the elements is that there's a puzzle. There's something that is unfinished about it. And even though we were not the police, we were not involved in the investigation, maybe we had some information, or we might see something that could help unravel this mystery, solve it. I think one of the things, when you mentioned the tone of the show as being kind of like unsettling in a way that goes beyond the theme music, I have a confession. People find this very odd. I like to fall asleep listening to episodes of Forensic Files. I find that really soothing. I find it really soothing. And earlier this year, when I discovered that you could stream these episodes on Hoopla, I thought, oh, well, this will be similar. And so I tried to fall asleep listening to an episode of Unsolved Mysteries, and it didn't work. It's keeping you on edge. It's kind of having you in that like constant vigilance stage, like you were saying, Meg, around like, I'm prepared for the worst because I've seen what can happen. Yeah, and then just puzzling it through.
Caroline, if this makes you feel better, not myself, but my wife Cheryl, who's always mentioned a lot on this show,
who I think is great.
Yes. She also likes to fall asleep to episodes of Forensic Files. So there you go. You're not the only one.
It's super comforting, and I usually do fall asleep by the end of an episode, and so I know like all of the terrible things that have happened, but no idea how they solved it. So I just trust.
Yeah, and I think there is definitely that kind of a little bit more calming feel with I guess watching something like Forensic Files, where they're talking about how they solve this mystery or this horrible crime, whereas Unsolved Mysteries were like, here, like you said, it's a puzzle. Here are the pieces. This is what we know. We need you to help solve it. So
it doesn't have an ending. Like it's kind of unfinished.
Mm-hmm, definitely. The one thing too I'm curious to know about, and I forgot to look this up before we hit record today, was another show that also came out around the same time as this. I think it might have been after, of course, was America's Most Wanted. So that show also kind of scared me as a kid too, where you're also presented with this mystery, and we need your help catching these crooks. So shout out to that show as well.
I also wanted to mention that one of the elements of the show that I really liked was when they would go to the phone bank, the investigation center, and I loved Keely Shea Smith, who was the journalist who was in charge of that. They would throw to her. She went on to marry Pierce Brosnan, and so they are, I believe, still together. So yeah.
Nice.
I liked her. In addition to the show trying to solve real life crimes, it also wanted to solve mysteries like UFOs, Bigfoot, and my personal favorite, spontaneous human combustion. What are your thoughts on these stories, and are you more drawn to these than real life crimes?
I'm not a giant fan of these ones. The ones I hate the most are probably the ones with psychics. Anytime there's a psychic, my husband will tell you, I sort of start to yell at the television. I really am angered by the existence of psychics. So that's a problem. But I don't mind the paranormal stories, and I think, if we've learned anything in 2020, it's that UFOs are definitely confirmed to be real by the US government, so I guess I shouldn't have doubted in the UFOs quite so much when I was growing up, but it definitely is not my favorite part. I kind of scoff at those ones, and I wait for the true crime to come back on, and that's what draws me in.
Yeah, what about you, Bryce?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I can say I'm more drawn to them, more drawn to the more paranormal stuff over the true crime stuff. But I think they each bring something a little bit different to the table. I think now as an adult, when you're watching these stories, you definitely want to have these real life cases solved. These horrible things have happened, and you feel bad for the victims and the families of the victims and everything. So you definitely want to see these people get caught. But at the same time, though, when you see the paranormal stuff, there's almost, I don't know how to put this properly, but I guess there sometimes can be more of a discussion around paranormal stuff, and for me, I find it very interesting in a way. And I know a lot of this stuff is probably just fake, but at the same time, and I'm going to get into it when I talk about the episode that I viewed, there's some stuff that kind of makes you pause and be like, this stuff can happen to me. So like you said, the UFO stuff, that can happen anywhere. Whereas sometimes when they are talking about these kind of murders or crimes that have happened, if you're nowhere near them, maybe you don't feel as much of a connection to them. But that spontaneous human combustion, Caroline, that can happen to any of us.
It
Hopefully
really
not
can.
While we're recording this. But.
No, it really can. And I think for me, that maybe not the UFO, Bigfoot, human combustion episodes, but something like mysterious phenomena, like something weird happened here, where it's verifiable that. And I'm thinking maybe particularly of something like the Marie Celeste, the ship that it looked like the people just disappeared. Where did they go? Right? Like something happened. What? And we don't know. And maybe it's totally explainable in a believable way, but there's an element of the unknown in not knowing exactly what happened. And it's just a little weird, a little eerie. So something that's kind of ghost-like, but kind of grounded in reality. I think that's my favorite area around the Unsolved Mysteries vein.
Yeah, and it's really interesting too, because when you watch some of these cases, and we talked about one, I won't say which one because I was like, oh, that guy totally did it. And I don't want to accuse anybody on this episode, but we talked about an early episode before, Caroline, of Unsolved Mysteries, and you see this segment and you're like, oh, well, that guy totally did it. You don't have all the facts in front of you, but you can clearly see that something's not right. You can pretty much kind of put those puzzle pieces together yourself. But you're right. But some of those, though, you're like, wait a second. I have no idea how this happened. Why is this a thing?
I think another part of Unsolved Mysteries and thinking of it, did you say 1987? Was that when it started?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. Things were different. then. And one of the kind of Unsolved Mysteries stories is like the lost love, or the people who drifted apart, the heir that needs to be found to claim the will. Now there are resources around that. Like people can find each other a bit easier with things like the internet. It's kind of, I don't want to say quaint, but there is like an of another era element to some of these stories as well.
I think my favorite in that genre of sort of stories you wouldn't see anymore are like the adoptees trying to find each other. Cause I think like you see there's so many unsolved mysteries that are about, this terrible children's home that kidnapped children, or somebody had to give up, they had 6 children and they gave up the 2 youngest and then they couldn't find them anymore. And I think about how much has changed in the world about how we see open adoption and like people knowing where birth families are. And it's, I don't think those are stories that, and they weren't in the new Unsolved Mysteries, because those are not the kind of stories that we would see as much. There are different ways to solve those problems than going to a large syndicated television show.
That's right. Now it's just basically like, just spit in this tube and we'll have your results back in a couple of weeks and we'll let you know who your relatives are, basically.
Yeah, definitely.
And if you've committed any crimes.
Yes,
definitely.
So beware.
So we just seen from the Golden State Killer, who, as of a couple hours ago, was sentenced to pretty much the rest of his life in prison, and all because of that sort of DNA test from like 23andMe, those services. Mm-hmm. So yeah, a lot of those unsolved crimes are being solved today with the help of technology. So one other thing too, I just want to quickly touch on, of course, especially some of those early episodes in the cases, it's kind of like, they're trying to solve this, whereas today they could solve it in 10 minutes. The one thing I don't know, it's kind of comforting watching it, is I love the cheesy reenactments on Unsolved Mysteries. The acting isn't always great. The people don't always look like the real life people, but there's something about the reenactments that kind of takes your edge off, I think, a little bit when you're watching the show.
Yeah, I think in watching some of the episodes that I watched, you'd watch, and if you meet the reenactors first and then you see the people, it can be jarring sometimes to be like, who is this person? Why is he talking about the victim? Oh, he is the victim. All right.
Yeah, no, the terrible acting kind of sells it. And I think it also, when we were talking about like watching something that's so dark, there's something about the reenactment I think that gives, like, you see it but a little bit of distance, because it's not like you're not watching an Oscar worthy scene here where it's really going to draw you in with the feelings. And going back to the Matthew McConaughey cameo, his scene is actually a really terrible death scene. Like, it's not well acted, and he's just shot and dies in the street. And so, which is as terrible for the family member of this person, but sort of when you watch it be reenacted in a kind of not great way, I think it does give you a little bit of that distance from maybe the true story.
Yeah. Do you both remember Rescue 911?
Yep. I didn't really watch it as much as Unsolved Mysteries, but I definitely remember it.
I remember that show being really popular. I think maybe when I was in junior high, I want to say. That was another show too that had a lot of reenactments, and these people go through these horrible things where obviously 911 has to be called, but there's something about watching the reenactments sometimes that you can't help but kind of giggle a little bit, depending on what's happened and the acting and the special effects in it. And but yeah, I think that's one of the interesting trademarks about these shows like Unsolved Mysteries and America's Most Wanted is those reenactments.
And interestingly, I don't believe there were any reenactments in the Netflix reboot. I when I was watching it, I remember feeling like, oh, that's kind of strange that's missing, because I think of it as such a key part of Unsolved Mysteries, the original.
Yeah, I think if I recall, and we'll get into this a little bit later on, but I think, they would actually try and show like footage of, like, they would go to where this crime had happened. But I don't recall really any reenactments either. And if they did, they would maybe show somebody walking up the stairs or something like that, or grabbing something off the counter. But it wasn't anything where somebody had to really deliver that much of a performance, I guess. before we started recording, I mentioned that we have, I believe it's like the first 12 seasons of Unsolved Mysteries available on Hoopla. So I thought today, for something a little bit different, we each kind of like split up the seasons. Let's each pick a random episode from these random seasons, and let's kind of share our thoughts on the episode. And is there a specific case in that episode that really caught your attention? Is there maybe an update that we can share with our listeners? Meg, I want to start with you. Which season did you pick and which episode?
Yeah, so I ended up picking season 5, episode 5. And this episode kind of had it all. It had like 2 different people with brain aneurysms. There was amnesia. There was a murdered female cabbie from Banff. Jane Doe found by teenage hitchhikers in Florida. Like, it just kind of had all the greatest hits of Unsolved Mysteries. And even a great reenactment with a guy hitting on a girl with amnesia who asks if she's an angel on recess from heaven, which is just stellar reenacting right there.
Yeah.
And
any single people listening to this episode, maybe try that line next time.
And then let us know how it goes.
Yeah, please.
Email us, podcast@epl.ca.
I do want to know if that line ever works. I mean, it did work in this case, but I'm going to give it the benefit of the doubt that she had amnesia, so she probably hadn't heard a lot of lines in her new life, and, came at it with a fresh slate there. But the mystery from that episode that I wanted to talk about is Georgia and Tacey. And so she just had this incredible life. She meets this serviceman, Daryl Tacey, while she's working as a go-go dancer. And the go-go dancing reenactment is exactly what you think it is, like everything you could want. And so they sort of fall in love and they get married, and she already has 2 kids and they have 2 more kids. And then again, she dies of a brain aneurysm after having the second kid, and he just tries to find her family to sort of say, hey, she's died. I've got the other 2 kids, what's up? But what ends up happening is that he realizes everything she told him about her life is basically a lie. And so then he starts looking back over their time together, and it's like, there was that weird time that biker gang came and saw her at the go-go club and they called her a different name. And there was that weird time where these guys who looked like federal agents were interviewing her at the club. And yeah, she was really paranoid and she would never answer the phone unless I rang and then hung up and then rang back again. And, she said she was being stalked by her ex-husband and all of this stuff. And he tries to find out. So that's kind of what the Unsolved Mystery is. He goes back to the go-go club and the guy's like, nope, never met her. She didn't work here. Stop asking questions. And so
that's always
not suspicious at all.
Not suspicious.
Nothing to see here.
Please stop asking questions. There's nothing. And so he takes a picture of her and gives it to a local news station to put on. They play it once and then they pull it and they say, stop asking questions. We were told to not do this anymore. And that's kind of the mystery at the time. He doesn't find out, and then eventually it is solved, sort of. They do figure out what her name was, and her real name was Edith Geraldine Boyd, which, I guess that would be why you would change it to Georgia. And they find her family and the dad of the 2 kids that she already had. And so then it kind of shifts into this lost loves that we were talking about segment where they reunite and he gets to see his kids and he's like, yeah, no, I was never stalking her. I don't know who was following her. So they never actually solve what was she so paranoid about? Who were the bikers? Who were the federal agents? Why?
Who got to the news
station? Yeah, who got to the
said...
news station and the go-go club? And so it's very interesting because they sort of solve it and they figure out who she is and the family is reunited. So that part is very lovely. But they never figure out what she was involved in these missing years of her life, and was she in witness protection and that for being involved with a biker gang? We don't know. And so I just think that one is so interesting. I would love to know what that story really is. Because, yeah, they're like, oh, it's solved. It's fine. It's is it though? I have so many questions. I want to know so much more about this person.
I guess it's good. It sounds like, in a way, it's good that obviously your family knows and, they can connect with grandkids and whatever. But, definitely something fishy when you go into a place and to ask about somebody and they're like, don't come around here and ask about this ever again. And when the media is like, no, we're told not to report on this ever again. So something's up there. There's a whole other story.
Yeah. So again, similar to Unsolved Mysteries, anybody knows what was really going on with Georgia Ann Tacey, please email the podcast because I am dying to know. I just can't believe this one.
Yeah, let's get to the bottom of this one, listeners. Caroline, what episode did you watch?
I watched episode 11 of season 3, and the big draw for this episode was Pics of the Dead, which is about a psychic artist who draws people's deceased loved ones. And she's a woman, Coral Polge from England, who, she has this psychic gift that she has nurtured, and people will come in and sit down, and she will just start drawing someone, and it turns out to be a deceased loved one that they have. And apparently she's done in the tens of thousands of these. They show some on the episode. I guess they're close, and this is where like I'm watching it, and they show her picture, and then they'll show like a split screen of the person that the guest says, this is my aunt, or this was my grandmother, and some of them are close and some of them really aren't. And then, it got me thinking about like, what are the defining features of a person, and how much of this is the power of suggestion, and if it's a person and you draw them and like they had really prominent eyebrows and that's in the picture, but their nose and mouth and chin and ears are all wrong, do you still see them? And this was season 3, so this would have been in the like late 80s, early 90s, and then she had been doing this for years before. So she probably wasn't doing a lot of research on people.
There wasn't
and
a
like
lot of
digging
Google
through
search or image search going
like
on.
archival photos, because she was doing it like people from all over the world. But I just don't know. Like, so there were a couple of them where I was like, all right, I see it. But the rest of them, I was like, and that was the kind of draw for the episodes. Like, I was looking on like best episodes of Unsolved Mysteries, and this one would come up, and it's like, you have to see this psychic artist and check her out. But I think you should really watch this for a segment they called Totally Exhausted, which was a bar brawl between two gentlemen that then led to a mysterious death. There were these two gentlemen in a bar who got into a fight over the barmaid, which is how she's referred to. And
it's like go-go dancers, barmaids, like jobs people don't have in 2020.
Right? So they got into a fight over who was going to drive her home. And eventually one guy got the upper hand and made the other guy leave, which was fine. It was the guy that she wanted to drive her home, so that worked. The guy who lost the fight, on his way out, he backs his truck into the other guy's truck in the parking lot and then speeds off. The guy and the barmaid come out. They're upset about it. They decide to go to the other guy's house, where he starts attacking his truck as retaliation because he backed his truck up. And he's kicking it, but not hard. And I don't know if this is on the reenactor, or if that was just a very poor way of like hurting someone's truck to begin with, because it looks almost like more of a dance that he's doing around the truck. So he's doing this. The barmaid is just sitting in the truck. She's kind of like, are we done with this? Can we just go home? I just like worked my shift. I'm done. And so he's kicking this truck, and then he goes and looks in the guy's garage, opens it, finds the guy on the ground, kind of like moaning and like being a bit sick. And he's like, good riddance, and then leaves. The guy dies overnight. Turns out he had like carbon monoxide poisoning, but they don't know how it happened because the truck, there was a second truck. Well, a third truck, I guess we're up to now. The guy, the deceased's truck was in the garage. The door was closed, and they believe it was running to put the carbon monoxide in the garage. But when they found him the next morning, the engine had been turned off. So the guy, they think he had the truck on to keep warm, then turned it off. It was already too much. He staggered towards the door, fell on the ground. Then the guy came in, saw him, and left, and then he died. And that's the police story. The family says, no, that's ridiculous. Guy number one clearly killed him, and that's where it's kind of left. Like it's between these two sides. The reenactors in this are like give it their all. Like they are committed to it. But
they want to win an Emmy.
Yeah, but watching it through the lens of modern times, like I had so many questions around it. Like we never heard the barmaid's perspective. Like they never included any details. Like how long was the guy in the garage? Was he in there? Did she hear any kind of struggle or anything like that could have given like a time frame? Because in his story, he went in, saw him, and left. If he was in there longer, maybe something else was happening. Things like where were the keys? Like, and whose fingerprints were on them. None of the like forensic stuff, which I clearly love, was covered at all. So it was kind of disappointing from that angle, but very interesting to think about, like what really did happen here. And then the third story on this was Wrongful Conviction, very much in the vein of Anthony Ray Hinton's story, or Making a Murderer, the idea of someone being coerced into a situation and not really understanding what's going on. I will say on that, they used language that was common in the time that the episode aired, particularly around developmental disabilities or cognitive abilities. And it's language that would not be really used in TV today. So I will just say that about that episode. But episode 11 of season 3 has a little bit of everything.
Caroline, that case with the truck and the carbon monoxide poisoning, that totally sounds like the producers of Forensic Files should do a follow-up. It sounds like they could pretty much solve that with today's technology.
Yeah, I looked online to see if there had been, and I think because the police consider it to be a closed case, that's how it's been left.
I do think about that sometimes with like the number of places in the States where the sheriff or whatever is an elected position, and you sort of wonder like, what kind of background in crime solving exactly do you have? And then you sort of hear these stories where like, well, one person told us that it was fine, so we just believed that. And you sort of go, maybe you should have had a little more questioning before you decided you were done with that story.
Yeah, it's funny because obviously we chatted with Anthony Ray Hinton and John Douglas, and that's the one thing. I know our justice system here in Canada isn't perfect by any means, but the one thing I am thankful for is that we don't have that system where it's like we have these elected, judges and sheriffs. And yeah, it's just obviously from a lot of these stories, just nothing ever gets solved properly, or wrong people, unfortunately, go to jail.
Mm-hmm. What episode did you choose, Bryce? You've teased it a little bit. I'm ready.
Caroline, if anybody follows me on Twitter, on August 20th, I tweeted out that I was watching Unsolved Mysteries before I went to bed, which was stupid. And so I was like, I'll quickly watch this because we're recording tomorrow. And so my episode, I watched episode 5 of season 10. And this episode, I'm going to say, is now, I've not watched all 617 episodes of Unsolved Mysteries at all. I've maybe seen 15 to 20 in my lifetime, just because they scared me as a kid. But this episode had everything. I'm going to sound like Stefan from SNL in a moment. So get a load of this episode. So this episode had a story about Elvis's last day. His stepbrother claiming that he, in fact, did not have a heart attack, but rather committed suicide. We have a story about a disappearance of an eccentric Harris who was into breeding show dogs and taking animal steroids.
Classic.
Yes.
Hey, like she took the steroids?
What's that?
She took the steroids?
Yes.
Oh.
Yes. It's
that
rather
did not end well.
No, and that's not even the most interesting story from this episode. And then we also have The Haunting of a House, which features ghosts who, if you're taking a shower, like to try and get a little physical with you.
No.
And that's also not the most interesting story from this episode. My jaw just kept on hitting the floor.
You were like, I just want to go to bed.
Pretty much. Yeah, exactly. So the segment that I want to talk about today is on the case of the Florida Skunk Ape. Have either of you heard of the Florida Skunk Ape before?
Nope.
I have not.
I feel like that is a sad part of my life that I haven't heard this yet.
I never heard of it until last night myself. But so the skunk ape, of course,
you were doing so well at keeping like a very straight face until just now. I just want to say,
thank you. The Florida skunk ape, essentially, just you're probably going to guess, is Florida's answer to Bigfoot. So the episode starts off, this segment starts off, shows this guy about 25 years ago, and he talks about how he's going through the Everglades with his brother, and they see something shadowy and moving in the Everglades, and his older brother holds him up when he was a kid, and he sees him. He sees the Florida skunk ape. And as you can guess by the name, yes, he also stinks. So now this segment here, we hear from not only this guy, his name is David Shealy, but we also hear from, because it's in the Everglades, so there's like tours going around. So the story covers about, I think takes place during the summer of 1997. And there's a real estate agent, a police officer, and a tour guide, and all happened on the same day to come across, as they're driving the back roads of the Everglades, the Florida skunk ape. They all happen to see him on the same day. It's crazy. So word gets around about the skunk ape sighting, and so this guy David Shealy is like, I know all about the skunk ape. I'm going to stay sitting in the Everglades for like 16 straight days until I get a photo of this skunk ape. Mm-hmm. So it shows him, he's sitting there in the Everglades, and he sees him after like a couple of weeks. He manages to take, as you guess, some blurry photos of the Florida skunk ape. Now, what's really interesting about this is because he is obviously an ape creature and he's standing up and walking around, he does get some of his fur caught on branches and other items out in the Everglades. So after they've seen him and he's taken his photo, they go out there. They get like a plaster cast made up of one of his feet. So they're kind of like small and like hoof-like, which is a lot different than obviously Bigfoot is. But then they also grab some of his fur as well. So they send an archaeologist out there, and he's like, I've never seen anything like this before. And this guy's totally bought into the myth of the Florida skunk ape. Now, what's really cool, though, is they take some of that hair, and Unsolved Mysteries, like the producers, they're like, hey, give us some of this hair. We want to we want to get this thing tested. Let's find out what this Florida skunk ape is.
Let's
so of course
blow the lid off this case right here.
We absolutely let's find out what is up with the Florida skunk ape. So now this is what was interesting, because I just assume they're going to say like, oh, well, the test came back inconclusive, which it does. But the part that's interesting about it, though, is they say that the strands of hair, they cannot match it up with any other primate, but they also cannot match it up with any other synthetic hairs or furs from costumes. So you do get to see the photo. And it's basically this like, looks like it's probably like 6 feet tall. Looks like it's just like this black creature, basically, furry black creature. So yeah, Robert Stack at the end of that episode gives us an update and says like, hey, we're waiting for the DNA results, but this is what they've told us. It does not match synthetic hairs. This is a real hair. We don't know what this creature is. So I do know we have some listeners down in Florida. If any Overdue finds listeners in Florida, if you have any Florida skunk ape stories, please email us at podcast@epl.ca and share those with us, because I was fascinated by the story. Of course, I'm watching it. I'm like, this is ridiculous. But then once they do that DNA test and, you know, they study the hair and the fur, and it's not a synthetic fiber. Something's going down there in the Everglades, and we need to get to the bottom of it.
That's where they spent their forensics budget, Caroline. They couldn't solve yours because they had to spend all of the forensics money on DNA tests on skunk ape.
Which I understand. Like,
I mean, really, you got to take priorities here.
Mm-hmm. I think that as you were describing it, Bryce, it has a very X-Files feel to it. Mm-hmm. I know most of my cryptozoology knowledge from the X-Files, and this idea that like they get the results back and they're inconclusive, but just enough to point to something weird going on. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I tried to do a little bit of research on the Florida skunk ape before we hit record today. I didn't get around to it too much, but other actual work to do. But
yeah, this is maybe your next career move might be like a full-time,
I think so,
skunk ape investigator.
I think so. Yeah. I might have to do that. I think I'd be good at it. Yeah. So yeah, that episode was wild. Like I said, it was episode 5 of season 10. Totally wild. Lots of stuff. I could probably talk all episode about that one.
Yeah, we will. Maybe we'll do like an in-depth, close reading of that episode.
Yes.
But speaking of episodes, the episodes of the new Unsolved Mysteries series on Netflix came out in July. I know you've both seen it. Which of the cases caught your attention, and are there any that you think might be solved in the near future?
13 Minutes, the one with the hairdresser and the really creepy husband stepdad. I think that one is very solvable. I feel like that they've really narrowed down that time frame, and that's something we didn't talk about much, but the old Unsolved Mysteries have a lot of timelines, right? Like the importance of like, this is the time frame where we want somebody who saw this truck in, like that was, I think, more important maybe before we had all of the forensics, was could we find somebody on camera, or could we find somebody in that time frame? And this episode really, I think, goes back to that of like, we know that she was answering the phone here and then not answering the phone here, and so we know that it's these 13 minutes that we have to find an answer for. So I definitely think that one is really solvable. The other one I think definitely is the French Count. Like there's somebody who knows where that guy is, like 100%. Like I don't think he's living super quietly. Somebody can find him is my guess. But
so you think he's alive?
I think so. Yeah. I think he's too much of a narcissist to just, I mean, if he wanted to kill himself, he could have done it in the house, right? He didn't have to like leave the country and do all of that stuff to like go on some tour of his favorite places before he did it. So
that one was called House of Horror.
Yes.
And allegedly, of course. Yes. The dad's name is Xavier Dupont de Legene, I believe. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. But that was an interesting one because I watched it with Cheryl, and we had a big debate afterwards about whether or not he's alive or he had committed suicide. I had the belief that he is out on the run. Cheryl thought that he had committed suicide after going to all these kind of some of his favorite spots. Caroline, you're shaking your head.
Yeah, sorry. I'm usually really aligned with Cheryl, but I have to side with you on this one. I agree with Meg. That one, the reveal of things was kind of like the pacing of that episode I thought was really interesting and well done. It was very much like a short film almost about how they revealed like this family that went missing, and they had the timeline, and then they were revealing more and more information about the family's life and what was going on behind the scenes. I think, again, without really knowing anything about it, I think it's certainly possible that he had been supported and sheltered by people in his circle. And I wouldn't be surprised to find out that he is still alive.
Yeah, so anybody listening who is on Reddit, there's a really interesting thread on Unsolved Mysteries that I'd been kind of reading on and off after I watched each episode, and people kind of giving their thoughts on it. And that episode in particular seems to have the most kind of question marks around it, where a lot of people are like, well, because of course the family is found buried in the backyard under this porch, and that's why it took so long for the authorities to find their bodies. And a lot of people were pointing out, like, well, he had a bad back, and he would have had to. There's no way he could have got under there to dig a hole to essentially put 4 or 5 people in. So yeah, I guess Caroline, to your thoughts about maybe somebody was helping him out, that kind of plays into that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Caroline, was there any episodes that really stood out to you, and is there a case you think will be solved sooner than later?
It was that one. I think that the idea of the family element of it and the different dynamics. It starts out like it's this picture perfect family, like they're living this fancy perfect life, and then it kind of cracks away and shows you what was happening behind the scenes or underneath, and it's like you're watching it and you're just, the twists of it really really got me. I think because of the international aspect of it, I think that leads to maybe something surfacing at some point if someone is trying to get across a border, or there's something that comes up through gaps in different laws. Yeah, overall, I thought there was a really good mixture of stories that they had, because they had the disappearing family that turned into the fugitive on the run, or I guess potential suspect on the run, because I don't want to make any claims. But then also the alien abduction story of a town in New England who all like secretly experienced the same alien encounter, and just nobody talked about it because they didn't want to seem like the odd one out.
That's such a New England response. If it was in Florida, it would be like, Florida man abducted by aliens. New England, they're like, I don't think I should mention this because people are going to be suspicious of me.
Yeah, that's it's funny because I'm glad that they did include that kind of UFO alien episode, because really, to me, that really felt like an actual Unsolved Mysteries kind of episode. They all were, obviously, but like, I'm glad they had at least one paranormal one in there. If you look at a lot of online chatter around those episodes, I think the UFO one was seemed to be a lot of people's least favorite. That one I thought was really interesting, just because, as we mentioned earlier in the episode, that's one where, we each have our theories on like the real life cases on maybe what we think actually happened. And some of those ideas are probably quite plausible. But for the alien one, I think the night was like September 1st, 1969. And all these random people who don't know each other happen to all have this really odd UFO experience. And it's kind of a scary episode as well. There's some pretty frightening details about something that happens to one of the young boys in that's involved, where he believes he was abducted by aliens. So it's kind of disturbing stuff. And but yeah, at the end of the day, it's interesting, and hopefully for those people, they get some sort of closure on it now that they're able to at least share their story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. In the old ones, we sort of talked about how many different stories were in one episode, right? Where we were sort of like, and then this crazy thing happened, and then this crazy thing happened. And I thought it was interesting. The new ones were really like, it was just one story per episode. Although, as Caroline said, the count one, it did sort of feel like it was maybe 3 different stories that happened in one because of the way that they set it up in transition. So I did think that was sort of an interesting change, that they picked these stories that they could really sustain a 45-minute or an hour discussion of, and not just, whatever it was, 5 to 12 minute segments.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's also one of the things too. Now you go back and you watch those older episodes, and clearly there's a lot to these stories that we're not getting just because of timing or whatever. But I do think that House of Horrors episode in particular was probably, I think, the best episode out of the new series anyway. Just kind of the way they were kind of ramping up the dread, and something within first minute or 2 of the episode, something bad happens to this family, and it just keeps basically getting worse from there. So I hope for that family's sake that they get that one solved sooner than later. The one for me that really stood out as well, I think Cheryl and I probably had the most discussion about this one, was No Ride Home. So in my opinion, I think this is the one that I think they solve sooner than later. So this is the one about the young black man by the name of Alonzo Brooks. He attends a party with his friends, basically in this really small remote town in the middle of rural Kansas. He gets a ride with his friends, and his friends end up going off in different directions. The one goes out for smokes and never comes back, and the other 2 just go off. So unfortunately, he's left there by himself. He never comes home. His family wants to search the property where this party was being held for him, and the authorities won't let them on. They do their own search. Nothing comes up. Then finally, they let the family go on and do their own search, and miraculously, within 5 minutes, they find the body. So to me, when I'm watching this episode, of course, in my personal opinion, I definitely think like somebody's obviously covering something up. When you have a professional, like there was a dive team there, and they're like, look, if that body was there, we would have found it before. So, the theory in that episode is that somebody moved this young man's body back to this crime scene. So yeah, I really hope for that family's sake that that one's solved right away, because I think that one seemed to me anyway to be the one where I think just because it's a party, there's lots of people there, somebody hopefully is able to say something and get this one solved anyway.
I think that one's really relatable too, because I think lots of people when you're young have that story of going to a party with friends, and then maybe your ride flakes out or you get separated from the person that you came with. And so I think that certainly there's some racism elements to that I think that have to be kind of contended with. But I think as an episode, it's a story that I think a lot of people will go, yeah, I can see how that moment happens. And so hopefully it is solved.
Mm-hmm.
So we're running out of time on today's episode. Bryce, before we get to the roundtable questions, can you share with listeners what we will be talking about on our next episode?
Absolutely. So the role-playing game Dungeons and Dragons has been around since 1974, but recently its popularity has skyrocketed. So a lot of people, of course, have kind of discovering it thanks to thanks to shows like Stranger Things. So Meg will actually be back with us on the next episode to talk about the game and how it's kind of gone from something that was, I want to say, was maybe a nerdy punchline to being one of today's most popular games for people of all ages. So Meg, I think you're also going to be giving us some tips on how to get started, right?
I will, yeah. I'm definitely very excited to talk about D&D because I think there's lots of misconceptions. I definitely promise I've been playing for years. There have been no satanic orgies, I'm sorry to say. So and that was a big concern at one point. So, but yeah, I think that there's a lot that people don't know about the game, or that they think it's, even if they are interested, they might be a bit overwhelmed in trying to figure out where to get started. So I think I'm really excited to share some of that with our listeners and you guys.
Yeah, I've only played D&D once as a kid. I enjoyed it, and I have a story to share afterwards. I think actually I did share this story on a very early episode of the podcast about my dad's reaction when he found out I was playing Dungeons and Dragons. But yeah, I have a couple friends who play it, and it's something that I personally want to get back into. I'm totally jealous and kind of want to get into a D&D group. So Meg, I'm really looking forward to this next episode to learn more about it.
For sure. All
right, roundtable question time. Caroline, I'm gonna start with you. Which true crime case or paranormal mystery would you be most interested in solving? When I sent out the outline for this episode, you were like, I know you're going to ask this question.
Yeah.
And you said how you've been kind of brainstorming or really trying to narrow down which case or mystery you want to solve.
I've been thinking a lot about this question because there are so many. And I like one of them that there's just so many, but my one side, I'm kind of pulled to JonBenet Ramsey. I really want to know what happened there. On the other side, though, my actual answer is going to be the death of Elisa Lam, who was from Vancouver, a university student who was in an LA hotel, and she was last seen on an elevator security camera footage and then disappeared. She was found about 2 weeks later in the water tank on the roof of the hotel. No idea how she got there, if like any of the circumstances around it. So then going back and decoding things like the surveillance camera footage and how she was acting, and it seems out of character. There's just so many elements of this that I would love to have that solved, and thinking about the family of her family, having answers for them as well.
Another kind of wrinkle, I guess, to that case. Yeah, I've read a lot about that one. That's kind of one of those ones that's just a very, very creepy and sad mystery. That I don't remember the name of the hotel, but the hotel itself is kind of known. It kind of has it has a dark history in the city of LA. Yeah, I think it's kind of known to be possibly, they say, haunted, but some infamous serial killers have spent time there, and it's not in the best areas of downtown Los Angeles. So that's also kind of another little part about that story. But yeah, that's one that hopefully gets solved.
Yeah.
Meg, how about you?
I mean, I love a classic serial killer story, so I was definitely drawn to like Jack the Ripper or like the Zodiac, like just one of those ones where there was, if it had happened today, we probably would have had enough forensics, as we were talking about earlier, and it probably would have been solved. But I just think it would be so cool to actually know, because there's so many theories of like, it was this person, it was the prince, it was this guy covering for someone. And I would love to just know, like, let's put this to bed and have an answer.
Yeah, I've chatted about this case before on the show. Zodiac as well is one of my I don't want to say all-time favorites, but because that is not the case. No. That sounds terrible. But it's like a mystery that I definitely want to know, like who this guy was. Just to be a little bit different and give a different answer, I would love to know for sure. The US government came out with acknowledgement of UFOs. but what about aliens? Like, does the government, the US government, have any, like, did they get any aliens that they were housing at Area 51? I mean, the galaxy is so huge. You have to think, you know, we are not the only intelligent creatures out there. So, let's get to the bottom of that. I think, it would like life altering for everybody if we got the definitive answer to that question of, are we alone?
Yeah, I think about that a lot. And I often picture someone becoming president of the United States of America, and like on their first day, they've just taken the oath of office. They go to, I don't know, some top military or FBI, CIA, whoever it is. Maybe it's a position we don't even know about. And like, you just turn to them and say, real talk. Where are the aliens? Who killed JFK? Let's go through this and find this stuff out.
Absolutely. There's a really creepy documentary, and a lot of people think it's kind of insane, but there's a documentary, I think it's called Unacknowledged. It might be on Netflix. I'm not sure if we have it in our collection, but it's about this guy basically, and he claims to have CIA sources and how much the US government knows about aliens, and that like Canada at one point slipped up that we know a lot about aliens, and it's just a lot of theories. But it does talk about like presidents coming in, and a lot of presidents they can't get like access to a lot of these files. So there's something going on there.
Trust Canada to not be the cool kid. Like, come on.
Exactly. Keep it together, Canada. Okay, so we're going to end on something a lot lighter, but one of the trademarks of the original series that we talked about was the cheesy reenactments. So let's say they were doing a reenactment of this episode of Overdue Finds. Meg, who is cast as Meg DeForest?
Well, I mean, I aspire to be as sarcastic as this person. So like Janine Garofalo is like my go-to person. I think she's, I aspire to that level of sarcasm, and I think that would be awesome.
That's a great answer. Caroline, how about you?
I think she was my answer in a past episode when I had to have someone play me. I think Melissa McCarthy could do a lot with this role, especially the part where I had to like crawl and get my laptop charger off the ground. And you both were such pros and did not even like blink. I think she could do a lot with that moment in particular.
I was wondering what you were doing.
Yeah, it was my battery was dying and my cord was on the other side of the table, so I had to first move, and then it was a long story. But
we really held it together there. Yeah,
you did. You just took the conversation and go and like let it happen. So I think she would be good. Bryce, what about you?
I think one of my favorite parts about the reenactments is that the person playing you doesn't necessarily have to look like you at all.
Not at all.
Exactly. So the one, I thought this would be kind of funny. I've talked about this show on past episodes, is a show called Nathan For You. So the star of that show, comedic actor and fellow Canadian, Nathan Fielder, who looks nothing like me at all. I would love him to play Bryce Crittenden in the reenactment of this episode of Overdue Finds. Very dry sense of humor, and it would just be funny to have the reenactment of Nathan Fielder, Melissa McCarthy, and Janine Garofalo, and then cut to us, and we're talking about the episode. And I would love for that to happen.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Meg. I know you have a couple of programs coming up. Is there anything that you would like to plug for our listeners?
Yeah, one great audio program for our podcast listeners is I'm hosting an EPL telephone social on September 3rd, and it's going to be kind of a call-in party line program. So maybe for people who aren't as comfortable logging into Zoom for all of their needs and social connections, but you still want to connect with people. So if you, or maybe you know somebody who's in that bracket who would really like to take part in that, you can contact me, and you can also find that on our website. And but I'll also be hosting one of our spelling bee sessions. So check that in September. We've got some great spelling bee fun happening.
Meg, when you mentioned the telephone social, the first thing that came to my mind was ice cream socials. So that might be, as somebody who works in marketing, maybe next time we promote it as like a telephone/ice cream social. So grab your favorite kind of ice cream and we'll chat on the
Especially
phone.
In this kind of weather, I think you've got a winner there.
Exactly.
Maybe we should just do that on the podcast. Grab your favorite ice cream.
Listen to the podcast.
Settle in.
We're going to chat about ice cream for the next hour. So enjoy.
Yeah, buckle up. Okay.
Yeah.
So we hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you haven't subscribed, we encourage you to hit the subscribe button so you automatically get new episodes. Please also leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and tell a friend about the show.
Yeah, and don't forget that we'll have a link to everything that we talked about in today's show notes. And as we mentioned earlier on, we received an email from our listener, so we love hearing from everybody. So you can reach us on Twitter at EPL.ca and use the hashtag EPL Overdue Finds. You can also email us at podcast@EPL.ca. I should mention with Unsolved Mysteries, I read earlier today that the second half of the new Netflix series will be coming out in October. So let us know if you want to have us do a follow-up episode on Unsolved Mysteries after that premieres. So thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.